careful, panel.
I said, I'll give you your 1 out of a million. And he was like, I got friends. I said, good for you. And so, out of that, just learning how West Virginia works became important, you know. My brother's in Florida, my baby brother's in Florida. He found himself with a 5-year bid. It immediately made my sister-in-law homeless. And there just seemed to be no help, given that they even admit that he is a nonviolent offender. They made sure that they curtailed the sentencing to make sure he didn't get a felony. But there was no other option other than to incarcerate him for the situation. There was no help for his family, his wife, and his 7 kids. You know, here I am in West Virginia, the rest of the family in New Jersey, and there's just all this confusion. And then I started learning about the confusion here in West Virginia. And there seems to be an ongoing desire for people not to do their research, but to assume something is a law or a privilege or how it works, when it really doesn't. And unfortunately, to find yourself in that situation and then find out, you can't ask for forgiveness after that for something like this. And so these great people have decided to donate their time. Me and Richard got together, figured out what we were going to do, when we were going to do it. We asked, well, he suggested pretty much everybody who said yes. And we've got this panel together, so those of us, as we continue having these strong opinions, we need to have strong opinions that are backed up with something. And we need to also open our minds and allow those opinions to change as new information is received. There's no way you can be effective just being stagnant. And hopefully we can come across with a mutual respect not only now, today, but also going into the future. So, with that said, I'm going to hand this over to Jedediah. He can share about how we got involved and then allow them to introduce themselves over. So Jedediah, if you will, please.
I'm Jedediah Walls. Okay. Currently, I work for the Kanawha County Sheriff's Office at the Day Report Center as an alternative sentencing program. But the real thing that really got me interested in these issues are that I'm actually enrolled at West Virginia State University in the Criminal Justice Master's Program. And so I wanted to look over some of these issues and just talk about educating the community, because a lot of people don't know how the system works. Even people who are going to school studying about it, even people who are in the system themselves, they might know what their little area is, but it's really hard for someone to know about the big picture. And so I think the more that the community can learn about the big picture, about how everything works together, or sometimes doesn't work together, can be beneficial to everybody. So I just want to let everyone kind of introduce themselves today, and then we'll start, and I want to go through the process and start with everyone and kind of walk through what happens when someone is arrested, how they work their way through the criminal justice system, starting from how they deal with law enforcement, all the way to their being sentenced, and how they're handled, from after being sentenced as well. And then talk about some of the other issues, like the second chance bill, and some other hot topic issues that are in the news that you guys might have, and open up the floor for some questions. But just first, we'll start with, on this side, we'll start with Sergeant Perdue. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Okay. Does this thing work? Yes. Okay. I'm Sergeant Paul Perdue with the Charleston Police Department. I've been here 17 years. I'm currently the Public Services Division Commander, which is encompasses a lot. I got the 3 prevention resource officers in the schools. I got 4 walk beats, 3 on the west side, 1 on the east. I got both humane officers, which has been a learning experience for me. Also, we run the Citizens Police Academy, the Junior Citizens Police Academy. We run Safety City, tons of other things, 26 neighborhood watch groups, so I'm pretty busy most of the time. But that's the down and low one to me, I think.
Hello, my name is Jamie Lynn Crofts, and I'm the legal director for the ACLU of West Virginia. If you're not familiar with the ACLU, we, our mission is to make sure people's constitutional rights and civil liberties are protected and not infringed upon by the government. With regard to criminal justice, unfortunately usually get involved after someone's rights have been violated. But for the last year and a half, one of the things that I'm most excited about that I've been working on is actually working with the CARE Coalition, including a number of people from the Charleston Police Department, on reducing racial disparities in arrests here in Charleston. And I think we've done some great work on that. So while everyone else here is kind of more on the ground every day with criminal justice issues, I kind of take a bigger picture look at things. So hopefully I can offer some insight to the discussion that way.
My name is Richard Holicker. I'm a deputy public defender in Kanawha County. The deputy part just means I've been doing it a while and they gave me a title instead of a raise. I have worked as a public defender here, in Logan County, in Mingo County. The system works differently everywhere. Before I go on, I just want to say I really appreciate the Unitarian Church sponsoring this. I've only been in this room once before. Sadly, it was for a funeral, but it was a friend who was a pagan lesbian and not religious at all, and the Unitarians opened their doors for her, so I really appreciate that. I have also served as a magistrate for a while. I was appointed and lost elections, so I'm not a magistrate anymore. I've seen all sides of the system, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and now I'll turn it over to Judge Tabit.
We've got our own.
We have one, thank you. Zoe A. Thanks, sir. Hi, my name is Joanna Tabit. I am a circuit judge in Kanawha County, and I'm kind of new to it. I've only been on the bench a little over 2 years, and before that, I was a civil lawyer, fussing about money and things like that. But obviously, when we're talking about criminal justice and what we're dealing with when we're dealing with criminal cases is personal liberty, which I can tell you is much more significant than just moving money from one side to another. And it's something that I enjoy doing, and I'm thankful that I have the opportunity to work with people that you're going to hear from, like Zoe Shavers and Rick Holicker, that prevent me from screwing up too awfully badly. But it's my pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation to be here. Thanks, Katharina.
My name is Zoe Shavers. I am currently in my 3rd year with the Kanawha County Prosecutor's Office. Prior to that, I was 17 years with the Kanawha County Public Defender Office. So I've been on both sides in the criminal justice system, and happy to be here and happy to answer any questions.
Okay. To start out, I'd like for you, Sergeant, to just kind of walk through what happens when someone has first police contact and that would lead to arrest, and basically walk through what happens to someone who is, having police contact and being arrested.
Well, obviously, the arrest portion of it, we have to have probable cause, to make the arrest, which is far above reasonable suspicion, if that makes sense. Once we have that probable cause to make the arrest, the contact that we have at that point is pretty much decided upon them, and hopefully everything's compliant and those kinds of things. We do have a use of force policy in place that we follow. Once the arrest is made, you want me to keep going from there?
Yeah.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So once the arrest is made, the transport to the station. Once they're at the station, that's where we do the processing. Processing consists of photographs, fingerprints. If there are going to be questions, obviously we read Miranda, and everything there is videoed, so we do have that, which is a good thing. At that point, they are taken to a magistrate, as long as the magistrate is in, or a judge, and it's determined whether they get bond, which could be a PR bond, which is a recognizance bond, which means they walk out on their own, or if they get a monetary bond, and how that works out. So from there, if they are sent to jail, that's when we transport to jail. Did I hit everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so at that point, you're done with them after jail, and you wouldn't see them maybe again until you would have a court date.
Right. Yeah, until court again, we probably wouldn't see them.
And then, and Mr. Holicker, you said you were a magistrate before, and also as a public defender, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how bond is set, and also at what point would someone first get to talk to an attorney?
Well, the bond question is an easy question with not an easy answer. There is no system in West Virginia for setting bond, and bonds are all over the place. People who have similar criminal histories and have been charged with similar offenses have bonds all over the place, from PR bonds to $100,000 cash. When I was a magistrate, I had to come up with a system that worked for me. And the system that worked for me was whatever the legislature determined the maximum fine was, that's what the bond was. Then it was either a personal recognizance bond, or in rare cases a cash-only bond, or I allowed them to post 10%. But that was just my system. There is no system. Typically, what happens is someone appears before the magistrate in the initial appearance. They don't have a lawyer at that point. They sign a bunch of paperwork that they generally don't understand. And if it's a felony, they are brought back in 10 days if they're in jail, within 10 days if they're in jail, or within 20 days if they are out of jail. It's after that that an attorney would be appointed. So we won't see them, we won't even know about them until after they've already been arrested. With misdemeanors, you don't have that luxury of 10 days. A bond is set. Maybe it's a bond you can make, maybe it isn't. You may not have a hearing for a month. We'll be appointed probably within the week, and one of our misdemeanor lawyers would come out and see them and file a bond reduction motion, but you actually have more rights as a felony defendant than you do as a misdemeanor defendant. What else did you want me to address besides bond?
Just, I think you kind of hit on at what point someone gets to have an attorney present, and maybe you could walk through up until like the trial stage.
Okay.
I just want to say Rick left out the fact that the public defender sends somebody to the jail every day.
That's what I was about to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Procedurally, what happens is, as soon as we get the case, which would be within a couple of days, we have an investigator who is assigned essentially to do very little more than go to the jail and meet with everybody to whom we've been appointed. There's a questionnaire that they fill out to give the lawyers information about the case, their version, which nobody will ever see but us, people we should contact, questions about bond, mental health, and then we follow up on those things. Most of our lawyers will go out to the jail before the preliminary hearing and meet with them. Not all, and even those of us who do don't always get a chance to do that. Sometimes before the preliminary hearing, the only way we know what our client's version is what's in those jail notes. But those jail notes are valuable and help us know what to do. The first thing that happens in a felony case, and I do mostly felonies these days, so that's where my expertise really is. I don't know if you did a lot of misdemeanors. Maybe you could speak to that if you did.
That way, didn't
Yeah, it's been so long though. So I'm going to address myself to felonies. A preliminary hearing is not a trial. A preliminary hearing is a proceeding where the state is required to put on only minimal evidence to convince the magistrate that there is probable cause to believe that A, a crime was committed, and that B, the person charged is the one who committed it. Probable cause is a very low standard of proof. That's the thing that prosecutors latch onto, but it is still a standard of proof, and that's the thing that defense lawyers latch onto. Once the preliminary hearing is set and we're there in court, one of two things can happen. Either there can be a preliminary hearing or there isn't one. If there isn't one, that can be for a number of reasons. Either The prosecutor and the defense lawyer will reach an agreement with the client's consent to waive the hearing in exchange for some consideration. That could be a lowered bond that they can make. It could be early discovery, and we can talk in more detail about what discovery is if anyone's interested in that, or any other number of permutations. If the hearing is held, typically the state will put on as few witnesses as they have to make their case. It's usually the police officer, or if this is something that was witnessed by somebody other than the police officer, that person, and maybe a supplemental officer, maybe not, but they put on their witness or witnesses, we cross-examine, and at the end the magistrate makes, and typically we don't put on witnesses, and there are reasons for that. When a witness testifies at a preliminary hearing, their testimony is locked in on the record under oath, and we want that from state witnesses. We don't necessarily want that from our witnesses. And in my experience, putting on witnesses, the defense putting on witnesses at a preliminary hearing doesn't typically change the outcome, which more times than not is a finding of probable cause. Once there's a finding of probable cause, the case is what's called bound over to the grand jury. That means that at some point the prosecutor will most likely present the case to the grand jury. It's a body of citizens. It's not the kind of jury you have at trial. The defense doesn't participate. The state puts on enough evidence for the grand jury to conclude that a crime was committed and that this person committed it. But again, it's only a charge, and an indictment is just a charging document. Once somebody is indicted, they go before a circuit court judge, and then we have an arraignment, and things happen from there, and probably Judge Tabit would be the best person to address it from there.
Okay.
But I do want to hear from Zoe in regards to her part, and what her feeling is in regards to that preliminary hearing you're receiving before we get to the judge.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I can add much to what Rick said. He pretty much covered it. The state does put on the minimum amount of evidence in order to meet the low burden, which everybody's been saying probable cause, and I don't know that any of you know what that is. And like, even when somebody explains it to you, you still don't know what it is.
Exactly right.
The way I learned it is, it's probably this person committed the crime and probably all of the elements from that. So it's probably, not to any degree of certainty. But that is so subjective to the person who is making that decision. So for example, if Judge Tabit is deciding a case versus one of the other circuit judges, they could reasonably come to different conclusions about whether or not there is, or, I mean, there's no like check mark. You check certain things, and if this is there and that's there, then there is, and if it's not there, then it isn't. So the state would present the bare bones case at the preliminary hearing, and then, as he indicated, most of the time the magistrate does find that there's probable cause. The case then is sent to the prosecutor's office already has it, but there's a certain unit called the grand jury unit, and they review cases to determine whether there is sufficient evidence to present it to the grand jury, and in deciding that, they should be deciding, can we prove this case? Not just will the grand jury give us an indictment, because once you get an indictment, then something else has to happen. You have to be able to prove it. And I think we have a very good set of grand jury people. They are among the longest serving people in the office, so they have seen the most cases. They pretty much know which cases can or cannot be proven. They sometimes offer plea bargains. They come to the conclusion that this case shouldn't be charged as it is, so let me just go ahead and bump it down. So for example, it's a malicious wounding. they may say, oh no, this is an insufficient injury, so I'm going to offer to let this defendant plead to a battery. That's a misdemeanor versus the malicious wounding, which is a felony. Once it gets past the indictment phase, it is assigned to a particular judge in a courtroom. And the way our office is, the work is distributed, is that there is an assistant prosecuting attorney assigned to each of the courtrooms. And the indictments are assigned randomly, except if you have had a prior indictment in front of a judge. So you get whatever you get. You get the new random ones, or your persons keep getting in trouble and come back, and you get them again. And then it gets, as he indicated, there's an arraignment, which is a hearing at which you plead not guilty, you get a bond set, and you get a trial date. At the trial, the burden is on the state to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. There's lots of issues that the ACLU probably has knowledge about the rights violations. And I actually have a question. Please don't let me leave without asking you a question. So what, we're at arraignment, we're setting a trial date. But you all probably know, or I don't know if you know, 90% of cases don't go to trial. 90% of the cases end up in what we call a plea bargain. And lots of people think plea bargain means getting away with it. You're getting away with something. But it's actually not. You're actually pleading guilty to something. And it does usually mean that you're not being convicted of everything that you're charged with. That's why it's a bargain. The state gives up something, sometimes some of the charges, sometimes a particular sentencing recommendation, in exchange for the defendant giving up his right to make the state prove their case. And I don't know if this is the part where you...
You know, something that you said did resonate with me. And before I talk about anything with respect to the criminal justice system, let me just tell you this. And what Zoe said is true. A huge majority of the cases... I'm sorry? Oh, okay, can you hear me? Okay. And just following up on what Zoe said, so many cases do, probably even more than 90%, resolved by plea bargain, and in civil cases, settlement. But I want to say this to all you people who might be called for jury duty. That doesn't mean that jurors do not serve an incredibly valuable service. If you sit on a jury trial, absolutely. I mean, you're right there. You're in the weeds and you're doing it. But even if you're called to serve and don't have an opportunity to actually sit on a panel, your very presence, being up there in that jury room, has an impact on what litigants do. What litigants do in a criminal context, what litigants do in a civil context. Because a lot of people want to manage risk, and there's always risk associated when you put a set of facts in front of 12 people in a criminal case that you don't know, or 6 people in a civil case that you don't know. And that's why civil cases settle, and that is a big reason why a lot of criminal cases plea. And the fact that there are potential jurors sitting up there in a jury room has a very significant impact on that, I think. So whether or not you think you're making a difference when you serve on a jury and don't actually get to sit on a trial, you really do. And it is a valuable service. And I've got to say that whenever I have a public forum to tell people, when you have an opportunity, do it. And I will tell you this, I've not had an opportunity, it's not really appropriate for me to do it as a judge, but as a lawyer, you can do this. And as a lawyer, when I used to try cases, I always used to seize the opportunity to do this. Once a juror's term of service was over, I like to call jurors who may have served on a trial that I had and just ask them what they thought. You know, you can learn about things that you're doing right, things that you're doing wrong, what you're successful at, what you need to work on. But overwhelmingly, because I always like to ask people what they thought about the process, and overwhelmingly, people felt that they enjoyed it. They had a sense of fulfillment and really felt good about what they did. So I'm just encouraging you when you get that. And I understand sometimes people have hardships and absolutely do have the need to get off jury duty. But sometimes you'd be surprised, some of the excuses, but in any event, that's my plea for jurors. But just relative to the process itself, I think Zoe and Rick have taken you up to arraignment, and that's when you come to the judge. And arraignment is, as Zoe and Rick have explained to you, that's when you present before the court for the first time. And you know, it's very important, and this is something that I do, and I don't know if other judges do it, but I'm going to tell you what I do. And I know that, Jenny, we've got you here from the ACLU, but that's okay, because Rick knows where I'm going here. You know, as a judge, I'm going to see criminal defendants maybe, well, depending. Usually, pre-trial, I'm going to see you typically 3 times. I'm going to see you at your arraignment. If you enter a plea agreement with the prosecutor, I will see you then to determine whether or not I will accept it or reject it, and then I'll see you at sentencing. Or if you don't accept a plea, I'll see you at trial. So there are very few times that you're actually in front of the court. And when you're in front of the court, defendants are asked to do very significant, important things. You've got to do things knowingly, in your right mind, intelligently, because we're talking about your constitutional rights here. And one thing I do, and I did it the first time when I had a 16-person Uniform Controlled Substances, violation of the Uniform Controlled Substances Act indictment. So there were 16 people involved in this thing. And I thought, good grief, when I looked at the charges, because it became apparent to me that some of these folks were suffering from serious addiction issues and may well come to court drug affected. And I'm like, my gosh, I'm asking them to enter a plea. I'm asking them to knowingly and intelligently waive rights. And I got to be sure they're thinking right. And also, they're on bond, and it's a condition of their bond that they refrain from using controlled substances. So that was the first time I did this. And as Rick knows, who's in my courtroom a lot, and he tells his clients, because they know I'm going to do it, when you appear in my courtroom, you be clean, because I'm going to have you drug tested before you are arraigned. I'm going to have you drug tested before you enter your plea, because, boy, especially at that plea stage, there's a laundry list of constitutional rights that you are waiving when you give up your right to a free trial. I mean, to a trial by jury. So if you make a decision to plead guilty and elect not to have the state try you for charges, you're giving up tons of constitutional rights. And, you know, if you're coming in all high, I can't be sure that you're doing that appropriately. And so I'll drug test in. And I think now people have an appreciation that will happen. But boy, that first day, they did not. And I had a jury box full of people who unfortunately, because they did test positive, were carted off to jail. But I also have people come in the courtroom after the fact, and you can see a completely different physical appearance, because we won't keep them in there long. If we have arraignments on Friday and someone's going to jail by virtue of the fact that they tested positive for controlled substances, I'm going to bring them back early Monday and let them dry out over the weekend. And you can see a difference. And I've had some thank me. Probably not Rick. But.
And let me say, I have great respect for Judge Tabit. This is nothing that I don't say in her courtroom. I object every time she puts somebody in jail on a bailable offense because their drug screen is dirty. From my perspective, if it is a bailable offense, and in West Virginia that means anything except for first-degree murder or kidnapping, it's unconstitutional to hold them in jail without bond. I understand why she does it, but I object every time, and I will continue to object every time.
I would expect him to. It's because he's a good lawyer, and he's doing what he needs to do for his clients. But I think hopefully it is one way for me to impress upon them the importance of getting clean and being clean, because when I place an individual on bond, that's going to be a condition of their bond. And some of them get it, and some don't. And this is certainly not without understanding that addiction is in fact an illness. And we can talk about sentencing and what we've done and how we try to be creative with respect to what we're doing in those types of cases a little bit later. But just with respect to the arraignment process, that's kind of what we're doing and how it works.
Judge Tabit, could you maybe explain a little bit of what your sentencing options are currently today, and what kind of sentencing options and alternatives you have?
You know, they're limited, Jedediah. I mean, it's unfortunate, and Rick will tell you what we have worked to do when it's clear, and oftentimes it is, and it's so prevalent that as everybody knows, we are suffering from a real addiction epidemic, and drug abuse is terribly prevalent in our society, particularly locally, and we try to recognize that, and through the Public Defender's Office, working with the Prosecuting Attorney's Office, we've developed a protocol in my court that we like to use in those types of cases where we can see that this is clearly someone who suffers from serious addiction. Jail is not going to help this person or do them any good. And when you all can get your social workers, and they work really hard on finding appropriate placements for them, we like to, when we can, get them into treatment. And what we try to do with this protocol is have some type of accountability in place so that we, and I say we, I mean the court, defense counsel, and the prosecuting attorney's office, as well as the probation department, get reports on how this individual is doing. And because unfortunately, if you don't have something like that in place, and this isn't faulting any particular
As she looks
agency.
at me.
No, not you. But what it is oftentimes, you know, when these folks get in facilities, I know that they may be understaffed and busy, and it might not be high on their priority list to report to Rick Holicker or Zoe Shavers or me. But I try to make it such because before we do that, before we put somebody into placement, we want to be sure that that facility is on board and ready and committed to giving counsel, giving the court, and giving probation all the information they need regarding this individual. Because oftentimes we would find, before we had this in place, the first time we find out that somebody is completely flunking out or not complying at all within the program, they've absconded, left the facility, and the prosecutor has to get a capias, and that's not good for anybody. That's not good for anybody. That is, it's just you know, I don't know what is it like for, you know, but that's what it is. It's a bench warrant. It's like, hey, you're supposed to be there. Sheriff, go out and get them and bring them back to the court, and you've got to account for that.
Are there any programs in Charleston that are really doing? Are there any programs in Charleston that are actually working?
You know, I've got to tell you, I've had some luck with a program. Now, there's a new one here in Charleston, right, that just got started a few months ago. Is it the Recovery Point? And Officer Perdue might be the better one to ask those questions because I don't have the facilities' names at the tip of my tongue. I've had some success with a facility in Huntington. I can't remember the name of that.
It's the male version. I can't remember.
Charleston Recovery Point.
I think that's it.
Recovery Point.
I think it is.
Yeah,
What is it?
Okay.
What is it again?
It's I guess the male counterpart to what is in place exclusively for women here now in Charleston. It's a Recovery Point.
I'm gonna try to look it up.
Oh yeah, we got phones. We'll find something for you. And there's some facilities we've used in Beckley.
Yeah, we're not limited to places in Charleston
No.
because most of them aren't here. Most of the facilities seem to be in Beckley. There are some in Huntington, and now there's one here.
Is the place still in Dunbar? I don't remember what it was
That would
called.
be Prestera.
If there's an inpatient, right? Something?
Yes.
So if you'll use the mic so that.
Sorry, I was asking, I wasn't given any information, so I didn't feel like I should.
I think you're thinking of Park East, maybe.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Well, Jamie, I want to ask you, they've talked about, something that she does that she finds effective, something that we have a defender objecting to. Now, I'm the person getting ready to be held over without bond. Is there something there, if I felt now my constitutional rights have been violated, what should I do?
Well, hopefully you would have a defense attorney like the one sitting next to me who objected to it, because I agree that there are some constitutional issues there.
I recognize that.
And it's really important for the lawyer to object whenever there's a potential issue like that. You know, whether or not there would be any recourse is hard to say, and you know, would depend on probably the situation, you know, the specific circumstances of the case. This issue, you know, has never been up to, as far as I know, has never been up to our state Supreme Court, so it's unclear what would actually happen if that were appealed up that high.
And it would be really hard to bring it to the Supreme Court because by the time you draft a petition, they're already out of jail or a bond has been set or whatever. And there is a way that you can get into the Supreme Court, with issues that have been resolved, and that is if they're capable of repetition. And it may be that at some point somebody will bring that to the Supreme Court. We have an appellate division. I'm not in it. That's for them.
Sorry. And you know, that's actually you know, a big issue that I see kind of across the board with, you know, things related to bail, is that oftentimes by the time an issue gets to my desk, that person is out on bond, on some sort of bond. So that's kind of a common thing that I see there. And I could go on and on about all sorts of things related to bail all night and the issues I have, you know, particularly with regard to misdemeanors. Oftentimes people will plead guilty even if they didn't commit the offense, because sometimes you know, it's either plead guilty or stay in jail. And I completely understand why people would plead guilty in that instance. And these are, you know, that's not specific to one court, that's not specific to West Virginia, that's a nationwide problem that we're facing right now.
We actually have an appellate lawyer in the audience, Matthew Brummond, and I don't know if he would have something to contribute on that subject.
Well, go ahead.
So can I ask a question?
My question is,
Oh, sorry. I didn't see this.
are there any facilities that seem to be successful for teenagers?
It's all dead silent.
You know, I will say this. Yeah, there are, but in the juvenile facilities in West Virginia are lacking with respect to drug treatment, with respect to mental health treatment. It's been recognized on a federal level that, and we are working on that. I'm on the Juvenile Justice Commission, which is it's a commissioned by the state Supreme Court to deal with issues with respect to juveniles in the system, and yeah, that you've brought up a problem that is not insignificant.
Yeah, and
I'm a retired psychologist.
Then you know.
I would be willing to volunteer at any time.
to add to that, I agree. We have some serious problems with not having the types of services we need in this state, particularly for juveniles. One thing that we're doing at the ACLU that I encourage you to get more information about if you're interested is we're sponsoring, or we're working with some people in the legislature on a bill that would take some of the money that's being saved from not incarcerating as many kids and put it into classrooms and get school psychologists and also get some more money to local areas so that they can fund treatment programs and mental health programs for at-risk kids.
Related to the lack of services, we also have a lack of services for drug addicts in West Virginia. There are facilities, we've talked about the facilities, but there aren't enough facilities. And Judge Tabit has heard me say this over and over and over at sentencing hearings, but you haven't yet. As a nation, we spend $80 billion every year incarcerating non-violent drug offenders. That's ridiculous. It doesn't cure the problem. All we are doing is warehousing people who need treatment, not punishment. And what I wish is that as a nation, we would come to the conclusion that we need to divert our resources from incarcerating people to treating them and resolving problems.
And I just have some statistics to add to that since we are on that topic. So the U.S. imprisons more people than any other country in the world. We have 2.4 million people behind bars, which is an increase of over 500% in the past 30 years. We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. People of color represent 60% of people who are incarcerated. 1 in 8 black men in their 20s is locked up on any given day. 75% of people in state prison for drug convictions are people of color, and in New York State, it's 94% of people incarcerated for drug offenses are people of color. The number of drug offenders in state prisons has increased 13-fold since 1980. Because of this, 5.3 million Americans have been denied their right to vote, including 13% of black men who are disenfranchised. And lately, the number of women in prison has been increasing too. From 1997 to 2007, that number increased by 832%. With regard to West Virginia specifically, 1 in every 36 black men is incarcerated, and African Americans in the West Virginia prison system actually mostly are low-risk prisoners, but still a large percentage of the prison population. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about.
And related to incarceration rates, the United States Attorney General just announced today that he is reversing the Obama administration's directive that private prisons not be used. They are statistically less effective, more people get hurt, they treat people worse. The only ones who benefit from the use of private prisons are those who own private prisons. And as justification for that, the new Attorney General said we're going to need the space to house people who we are ultimately going to be deporting. So we're not in a good place.
Well, before we go on, I want to make sure Zoe has a chance to ask her question.
Okay, yes, it's actually for
The microphone and
the police department and the ACLU. Okay, and there's a story behind this. I have a teenage son, and there was this big fancy house being built in our neighborhood, and it was nighttime, and him and like 2 of his friends and 3 little girls, they were like 13, I don't know, they went behind this fancy house, and they were kissing, and I guess somebody called the police, and the police came, and so here's where the question comes in. They took pictures of the 3 boys and put them in some kind of book. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Is there a gang book?
It's not a gang book. Anytime we have...
Here's a book.
You got...
Perdue.
Anybody hear me without a microphone?
Yeah.
All right. We do not have a gang book. Sorry, I'm a Sergeant Bundle with the Charleston Police Department.
stand up, Sergeant. Let us see.
I'm the Assistant Chief Detective. I work directly for Steve Cooper in the Detective Bureau. And we don't have a gang book. We just do what they call field interrogation or field investigation reports. And anytime we run across someone who is suspected of criminal activity, in this case, trespassing or possibly suspected of burglary, I'm not sure how the call would come in, or B&E, or whatever they said they were stealing property, then officers would go, get their information, get their address and phone number, their mom's phone number, so they can call and say, hey, please come get your kid. And once they're sure they're not in any trouble, then they'll release them. But in the meantime, they still have to document who they ran into. And part of that is taking someone's picture. It's not always for a criminal purpose. Pictures have come a long way for us in the past for if your son would run away, or if he doesn't come home from school that day, he goes with the girlfriend to go kiss elsewhere. And we've already got, hey, we got this picture instantly. So if you're in trial, we can't get a hold of you, we've already got this picture to disseminate immediately to get it out there. So the picture does serve that purpose. On the criminal side of the house, it does serve a purpose because we can use that picture to help build cases if we're having a problem. So in your area, you have people breaking into cars over and over and over, and you get a glimpse of them. And they're wearing a red shirt, bright orange sneakers, and an orange hat. Something very distinct. Well, in this picture, we get these pieces of clothing that match this description. We now have someone to come to and ask questions.
How long do you keep those pictures?
Everything, when someone turns 18 at the Charleston Police Department, is expunged. Our records division handles every bit of that. Lieutenant Tim Davis is very on top of things when it comes to expunging records. And that's not only people who turn 18, but also if you file for expungement in circuit court or in any other court that would get you an expungement, our record system would purge our system and get rid of all those files.
To hit and add to what he's saying, I think a big thing is, from a law enforcement perspective, I'll give you for instance of my own. I was driving home, I was in plain clothes, almost like I am now, except for nothing said Charleston Police. I was in my personal vehicle. I had my shirt pulled over, but I had my gun on my side, and it was covering my gun. And I get pulled over by a trooper. When I get pulled over by the trooper, he gets me out of the car with a felony stop. If you don't know what a felony stop is, what that means is, driver, put your right hand out the window, drop the keys on the ground, with your right hand open the door, exit the vehicle, place your hands on the back of your head, walk backwards to the sound of my voice, get on your knees, cross your legs. Then he comes up and puts handcuffs on me. And I tell him at that point, hey, I'm a policeman. And he's like, well, where's your badge? Where's your badge? I'm like, I have a gun too. And he's like, well, so he takes the gun, he finds the badge. And I'm like, he's like, man, I'm sorry. He said, you matched the description of a burglar. We had 2 burglaries going on up here in the area. You're driving the same truck, and you've got the same description. The thing about that is, number one, is what if I got out of that car and started waving a badge or a gun in the air? You know what I'm saying? The thing that you don't know a lot of times is the things that we're dispatched for. And that's what it comes down to. The information that we have on hand at the time, whether it's a gun call or not. If somebody calls in and says you have a gun, when I left this morning, my kids hugged me and they want me to come home tonight. My wife expects the same thing. They're very stingy in that way. So I have to be safe on the street and try to provide courtesy as much as I can. But if it's a gun call, I'm going to treat it like a gun call until there's no gun. So just because we come up and we say, hey, I want to pat you down or whatever real quick for our safety and yours, doesn't mean that I'm trying to violate your rights as much as I am trying to keep everybody safe, to include you in case you try to pull out a cell phone and I think it's a gun. And in that circumstance, who knows how that call came into that house and what they said was going on behind there for us to know what happened there. But I will give you another case in point. Down in North Charleston, there was a shooting down there. A shots fired call came out. One person called the call in and said they heard shots fired. Patrol went down there and they looked around the area, couldn't find anything. One officer stops a male on the railroad tracks and he takes a picture and does a field interrogation. When he does that field interrogation, he turns it in. The next day, a woman walks out in her yard and finds a man dead in her yard. After they canvassed the next day, when CID went out and canvassed the neighborhood to get some insight, people thought it was fireworks. People thought it was this or that, and they didn't call in. Well, if they had called in that night, they may have been able to triangulate where those shots came from and may have found that body that night. But the case here is that actually happened. There was a dead body there, and the person that shot him was, guess who? The person they stopped on the railroad tracks. So those things do come into play then too and help us out a lot. I'm going to hit on one other thing real quick. Recovery Point in Charleston is also called Recovery Point in Huntington. That's the male version of the system. I texted Rachel Thaxton. They actually have 70 ladies down there right now. They are going out, and you should see them out and about in the community here all the time now, because a bunch of them have made it to what they call phase. And what phase is they have worked up to the point where they can actually go out. Last night we were at a meeting and they came up and asked me if they could help us with some work, and they are getting ready to, because they worked up their own tree. So they're going to help us out here now too. They want to get involved in the community. If you've got anything that they can help you guys with, if there's stuff going on here, projects, gardens, whatever, let them know, because that's what they want to do and that's what they're supposed to do here in this community, is start giving back. I'm gonna hit on elements real quick. Y'all, we were talking about elements of the law. I think that's a really critical part of every single part of our jobs, is the elements, because if they're not there, there is no probable cause, period. And when I say elements, what I mean is there may be an A, B, C, and D that has to be met. And I'll give you an example of that. People call us and they say, well, there was a guy up here knocking on my door and he was threatening to whip my hind end, right? Is that, what law does that break? Does anybody have a guess? You can't cheat.
That's assault.
Is that assault?
That
It's
could
not
be
battery,
assault.
it's assault.
It could be.
Right?
The door's locked. You're behind the door and the door's locked. Did I say that part?
No.
Well, I think in the book it says in there somewhere that there has to be a perceived nature at the time of the threat, that the threat's going to be carried out for there to be an assault. So technically it's not an assault by definition of the code.
There needs to be an immediate
Correct.
apprehension of
An
immediate bodily harm.
Immediate bodily harm. But if I'm standing in front of her now and I pull my fist back and I say I'm going to hit you in the face, there's a perceived nature there. So there's an assault. Now, the only thing there, technically, if you've asked them to leave and they haven't left, there's trespassing, right? For battery to occur, that's an actual making contact with somebody. I just want to point that out. Burglary, if somebody breaks in your house and they fall asleep on the couch, is that a burglary?
Yeah.
Is it?
No.
Huh? Is it?
Breaking and entering.
Is it breaking and entering? Anybody?
It's not.
It's not breaking and entering. Breaking and entering is into it's not a dwelling.
But if they eat a cracker,
For burglary to occur, there has to be an intent to commit a crime once they're in. So you have to have the intent to commit a crime once you're in there. If you're drunk and you think that's your house and you break in, you pass out on the couch, not burglary.
but that doesn't mean people don't get charged.
True.
Is there a trespassing charge?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. There is trespassing. But I'm just pointing out that, a lot of times our customer service issues aren't necessarily that we overdo, is that sometimes we underdo. But people need to understand that we have things that we have to follow and steps that we have to follow in order to get to the point where we do make that arrest. So we have to have knowledge of the law just as much as anybody else.
How do we get you to become a training officer?
I have been. Forever.
And just to tie that into what they were talking about earlier, so for someone to be found guilty, presuming a case goes to trial, it's on the government, so the prosecutor, to prove that the criminal defendant satisfies every single element of each crime that they're charged with. And so, for those non-lawyers in the room, if you're a criminal defendant, you're not supposed to have to prove anything. It's the government that actually has to prove that each of those elements were met in that case.
I have a question. It's kind of going back to your concern.
Yes.
I can't think of the name. Thinking of the context of the terrible statistics, not just nationally, but in this state and in this community, not just of like black men currently in prison, but if you take all of the black men in this community and how many of them have been at some point in prison. And I can see the benefit of that picture, but at the same time, does it mean that now her son is marked kind of, anytime somebody sees him on the street, an officer sees him on the street, he's going to be, there's something about him, we need to watch him. And I think the times that my son did dumb things and was brought home. And I don't know that would have happened if my skin had been darker.
You bring up an interesting point. There is a litany of research, and it's been done in this state and nationally on disproportionate minority contact. And it's not just about incarceration, it's just about how minorities are dealt with respect to law enforcement. But I'd like to hear Officer Perdue and you, Sergeant, because I think Chief Webster and everybody is really doing a lot of community outreach with respect to recognition of these issues and trying to deal with them.
Yeah, we went recently, we went through diversity training. We also went through some conflict resolution type stuff, which more or less comes back to the same thing, is that we try to treat everybody the same way, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their race, gender, ethnic background, social background, any of that stuff. And the reason for that is, I mean, we're all people, and that's what it comes down to. We have a job to do. And I'm telling you the honest truth when I say that from the top, I mean, in the police world, it's not a traditional thing for there to be a customer service element to that job, if that makes sense. Because most times we can't be Burger King and you can't always have it your way. Because most people don't want to go to jail. But unfortunately, that's part of our job. But in the same token, that customer service pushed down from Chief Webster down, it means a lot. Just giving the callbacks, being there, treating people with dignity. You don't have to shame people. Now, in the same token, everybody doesn't, sir, could you please put down the knife? That doesn't work every time. You know what I mean? There are people that are irrational in the world. I could tell you stories that would make, the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And I've been scared to death. And that's the thing that I think we need to get a lot of people to understand, is that the physiological changes that go on in every other human being, we still experience the same thing. Whenever, when you get excited or you get scared, the first thing that happens is your heart rate starts to go up. Once your heart rate starts to go up, your breathing starts to go faster. When your breathing starts to go faster, you start to lose your hearing. It's called auditory exclusion. Once that happens, all your peripheral vision starts to come into one right here. And I'm looking right at the threat. So what happens is I lose all this vision out here. I've lost my hearing. I may be telling you something and you're telling me back, but I don't understand that. It's important to realize that we go through the same thing. I get scared. Right over here on Level Drive was one of the scariest days of my life, and that guy did not have a gun, he didn't have a knife, he didn't have anything. But I had it in my mind, he was probably going to tear my arm off that night and beat me to death with it. He was a horse, and he was not in a good mood at all. And luckily his wife came out and saved him. But that's the thing, is you have to realize that there is that factor there. And that we are people. We make mistakes the same as anybody else, but in the same token, anytime something like that happens, customer service-wise, all you have to do is call the chief's office. If there's a problem with Charleston PD, call and make a complaint. We encourage it because I work hard every day, and I'm proud of what I do. And I made good grades in school, and I went to West Virginia State College, and I got my bachelor's degree. And when I went in the Army, I blasted the ASVAB out of the water. I could have any job I wanted to be. I'm highly motivated, work hard. I could be whatever I wanted to be. But I love this job because I think I can help somebody. And saying that, most of the guys I work with are like that. And if there are ones that are there that don't, I want them gone. I don't want them there either. So that part of it, make that complaint and please push it up.
And sorry, I just wanted to, did you want to jump in? Or, to talk just a little bit more about some of the racial disparities. And sometimes it is the result of, like he said, police officers are people. And just like, I'm a lawyer and there are bad lawyers, there are bad people who become lawyers. There are the occasional bad people who become police officers. And racist police officers do exist, but that's not the only reason for these racial disparities. Criminal justice policies and practices can lead to a lot of these things. Implicit bias, which is not intentional bias, comes into play with juries and everyone. That's something that every person in the world has implicit bias. If you'd like to check what some of your own are, Google Harvard implicit bias test.
Scary.
Really interesting.
Very scary.
Interesting things about yourself. And that definitely plays a role. Instructional disadvantage plays a role too. Minorities are more likely to be socioeconomically disadvantaged in the United States. And African Americans in particular, even those of middle class, are more likely to live in low socioeconomic neighborhoods. That's just a statistic. And when you are in those neighborhoods, it's more likely that you're going to end up in the criminal justice system. And, so we can talk about, racism on the personal level, but it really is more than that. And we do still have systemic and institutional racism in this country. Mandatory minimums for crack are still higher than they are for powder cocaine. And so I just think we need to recognize that that element exists also. It's not, I have so much respect for the Charleston Police Department. Chief Webster is wonderful. But we do still have, that disparity in arrest statistics here for many reasons.
Good. First off, I wanted to say I'm just so impressed with the Charleston Police Department, the job that Chief Webster, Super Cooper, your boss, so amazing. One instance, and this is going to lead to my question, my downstairs neighbor, about a week before the chemical spill, so January 2nd or 3rd of 2014, his wife, or she, had their child at the Exxon on Greenbrier and Washington Street, west or east, and polar Arctic freeze. She, questioned, do I bundle up the 2-month-old baby and take her in to pay for my gasoline? No, or him, no, I'll leave him outside for just a minute. I'm going to run in 30 seconds, be right back out, left the car running. You remember, Paul, remember, I see, and so do you. Amazing job you guys did. You were on it. The baby was safe. In 45 minutes or so, if I'm not wrong, it might have been a whole hour, but really quick, had the car, total manhunt. It was amazing. The guy that did it, threw the book at him. The kidnapping, grand theft auto, it was everything, abduction, everything. Got plea bargained down to, I think it was less than child endangerment. That's the question. I mean, I see where the police will often charge properly or very harshly, the ones that do something really bad, that like that, he kidnapped the child. I mean, didn't know there was a child back there. He did, a mile or so, and he realized there was a screaming, crying time bomb in the back seat. But a dumb kid, let's face it. But it was plea bargained down to next to nothing. He didn't serve any time. He ended up with probation and had to go to a therapy of some sort. So it seems like so much is plea bargained down to next to nothing, and that's kind of my point. And does that not often lead to the high incarceration rate instead of going to jury trial, where maybe the guilty would go to jail and maybe they wouldn't, but maybe the innocent wouldn't either, or the not very guilty? I mean, is there a correlation between the incredibly high incarceration rate in the United States and the, let's face it, incredibly high, 90%, I think someone said, plea bargaining rate here?
I'll address it.
Yeah.
You go first.
I think Officer Perdue touched on this a little bit, specifically with the questions that he asked everyone in the audience. So if you break into someone's house and you fall asleep on the couch, is that burglary? Everybody's sitting here going, yes, 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 yes. But it's not really, it's trespassing. So the guy, I wasn't in the prosecutor's office at that time, so I can't speak for whoever made that decision with regard to that plea bargain. But perhaps the guy who thinks he's stealing a car does not have the required intention to be convicted of kidnapping. Because crimes, lawyers have these words, right? There's mens rea and actus reus, but so you have to have a particular mindset. You have to intend to do a particular thing in order to be convicted of that thing.
Well, when you realize
but there's no,
he left it out, he parked the car.
That would be the child. That would be the child endangerment.
Yeah, there's.
That would be the child endangerment. Just based on what you just said, not that I was privy to any of the plea bargaining. I think Rick wants to talk about.
Yeah, not to speak to that particular case, but in general, if we didn't have plea bargaining, the entire system would come to a grinding halt. There is no way that 7 judges and however many prosecutors and however many public defenders could try every case that is indicted in Kanawha County. To your point, I think that the prosecutor's office intentionally overcharges in virtually every case so that there will be room for a plea bargain. I think most of the time when our clients enter plea bargains, they are probably most of the time pleading to what they are really guilty of. Just because you're charged with a crime, and just because you did something doesn't mean the crime you're charged with is what you did. I think there are miscarriages of justice, but on balance, I think the results of plea bargains are probably mostly fair.
Just to touch on, I'm sorry, just to touch on the particulars of that case. I worked that day and I worked that case. And Rick touched on earlier, you meet the burden of proof of probable cause, which is much lower than proving someone guilty. And police officers at the time had the statements of the victim, this woman who just had her baby stolen, the witnesses who just watched a baby leave in a car from a guy who didn't own the car, so he's still in the car, he's still a baby. So they're getting all this input. But again, it still goes back to what elements came. We didn't even know there was a kid in the car at the time, which, based off of the plea bargain, I would say he didn't.
Right.
But we are operating on the information we had at the time, and we apply the applicable laws, and if the probable cause is met, then it's where you see A, B, and C, D charges that make it look far more egregious. But once Rick Holicker and his crew get a hold of it, and they're able to say, well, this element isn't met, or this element isn't met, and then they converse with Prosecutor's Officer Zoe A, then they're able to say, okay, he is guilty of this, and that's how we get the child protection. So that's how it progresses from all of this to this.
And just to give a nice plug to those lawyer words, mens rea and actus reus, if you really think about it, I think that we can all agree that it's important that for these more serious crimes that the person actually know what they're doing, and that's what those words mean. So, that's kind of an extreme situation there, but it's not like he still didn't meet the elements of another crime. And I think that it's a great thing about our criminal justice system that with more serious crimes, we do have that, that requirement that people actually know what they're doing, or otherwise we can't send them to prison.
My question is, did Webster initiate a program teaching officers about the black community? Is there such a program?
We're involved right now with the CARE Coalition. That's one thing. We have five different pillars that we're working on right now. One of those is a youth council that I'm interacting with Kai Smith. She's from West Virginia State College. And we're getting kids involved between the ages, it started out to be 18 to 25, but now it's 16 to 25, to come in and be part of this council, because they're the ones that the voice is pretty much not heard of. You hear from the kids that are a little younger sometimes because we're in school with them, and you hear from the folks who are older than that, but that's the area, the age group that we're missing out on speaking to us and telling us. So that part of that is going to be a dialogue that's going to occur between them and the police department to say, hey, here's where we're at, and this is what we're looking at, and this is what we see, and this is what we think should change, or this is what we think is going well, and that kind of stuff. So that's one part of it. The other part was the diversity classes that we just went through, which all officers went through, and it was taught from outside. In other words, Kai Smith, and I can't even remember everybody's name, Kenyatta Grant. We had several folks come in and help instruct that. So it wasn't like us teaching us, if that makes sense. So we got a lot of outside, and a lot of the stories from there that are things that I took to heart. For instance, Kenyatta told a story about, I think her dad being pulled over, and she told the two different stories. The dad gets pulled over here, and then the dad gets pulled over here, and the two different officers that she interacted with, and that had an impact on me, because you look at the way that she was treated in the first incident, and I'm telling you, I have a mom, and there ain't no way that would stand with me. So, it's one of those things. But
is that something that's going to be continued with?
Oh yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. We're heading in that direction. That's where we're at. We know. We have the CARE Code. What's the other? I can't remember. We have so many acronyms. Yeah, Reset is another one that we're doing right now. That's with the clergy throughout the whole valley, pretty much. And what that was, it was in response to Ferguson. Ferguson did not have a good relationship with their community, nor did they have anywhere where they had no relationship whatsoever with their community. And when that incident occurred in there, it went quick and a downward spiral. So what we've done here is try, while times are good, because it's hard to make a friend at 3 o'clock in the morning. We would rather make a friend now before 3 o'clock in the morning. That way when something happens at 3 o'clock in the morning, we'll be covered. And that's part of it too. We're calling them second responders. It's just, we're constantly out.
Well, also I wanted to say really quick, for the ladies that are from here, I attend the meetings on behalf of the Black Lives Matter Solidarity Task Force that's housed here. So I'm one of those individuals that attend the meeting on our behalf and bring back, and it's through them, through the CARES, that we're working on the second chance. Also, I want to bring to attention, I tend to have like just hour-long events and meetings. If it's okay with everyone, we go a little bit longer. We have some more things to be said. Is everybody good with that? I don't want to take up too much people's time. Is it okay if we go?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say I was one of the trainers for that training, so I can answer some questions if you guys had questions about that. And then I did also want to mention, one of the other things that we've been working on through the CARE Coalition with the Charleston Police Department is promoting the second chance bills in front of the legislature. Because like we talked about, it's not just people who are in prison, it really can affect the rest of your life. And so what this would do is, I know that there's one bill that would allow for people to obtain driver's licenses when they are released, which is a huge barrier that people face right now when they're released from incarceration. Because if you can't get a driver's license, you can't drive to your job, and you also can't show your ID to verify your identity for a job. So that's really important. And then there's another one that would allow for expungements of nonviolent felonies?
Misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies.
Misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies after 10 years?
After 1 year.
1 year. Which, is another thing that would really help people be reintegrated into the community. And so I would encourage you, if you support those, to call your member of the House of Delegates, because that's where we're really worried about it not getting through.
Also, it was sent out today that our meeting at the legislature, the lobby day, is going to be March the 16th. That we'll be up there talking second chance, ban the box, as well as some of the other related topics. So, March 16th at the Capitol.
Yes.
The ACLU will also be there on March 2nd.
Yes.
All kinds of welcome day.
Yes, and we're expecting a great crowd for All Kinds Welcome Day. If you can, please stop by. There are a ton of social justice organizations participating.
Including this one, Black Lives Matter Solidarity.
Yes, so please come and show your support.
What's that?
All Kinds Welcome Here Lobby Day is March 2nd.
It's in the email that's going out.
What time? She just wants to know what time.
It starts in the morning.
At 9.
9.
Let the gentleman have his question. Is that possible?
Let me just address one thing about expungement. There are 2 expungement statutes on the books right now. One allows you to petition the circuit court to expunge offenses for which you were not convicted. If you were charged with something, but you are acquitted or the state dismisses, it still stays on your record that you were arrested. And that can have negative consequences. That's on the books right now. And you can apply for expungement under that statute if you were charged with something that ultimately didn't result in a conviction. There is another statute on the books right now, which is the one that the state senate is proposing to amend. The way it is written right now, if you are between the ages of
18 and 26.
18 and 26, and you are convicted of a misdemeanor, you can apply for expungement. There is no expungement under the present statute for felonies for which you have been convicted. The primary thing that this new statute would do would be to allow for expungement once for conviction of a non-violent felony if it's your very first one. Later felonies, you don't have a shot at it. This needs to pass because there are so many people who do something stupid that results in a felony conviction that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. It keeps them from getting certain jobs, it keeps them from certain employment. If this statute passes, there will be an opportunity for them to have a second chance, which is why it's called the Second Chance Bill. Last year, it was passed unanimously in the state Senate. It didn't get out of committee in the House. So as she said, the important thing if you're going to lobby is to focus your attention on the House, because that's where it's likely to fail if it fails.
Okay, who's here from the lobbying group? Are you?
We're here.
Okay, I just wanted to point out something to the people who are lobbying for the expungements. The way the law is written right now, you can have a dismissed charge expunged unless it was dismissed in exchange for a plea to another charge.
That's true.
You can also get a charge expunged if you pleaded to it between the ages of 18 and 26. There's a loophole and it's a problem. If you are between 18 and 26 and you plead guilty to whatever, at charge A, and then charge B is dismissed in exchange for the plea, no matter how old you are, you cannot get charge B expunged. So it needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to point that out to the people who aren't going to talk about it.
Just a citizen. You all brought up so many things that I had so many things run through my head. I'll just try to touch on the most important ones that would be important to maybe the community at large. I have personal things that I would ask later, maybe after. Yeah, first off, like everybody else, Jamie and I know each other were friends, but I also know from other people in the community, thank you. I have heard that you all have been doing the training with the community relations, race relations, and that really sends a strong message, I think. So I've been told by several people about that. The one thing, we were talking about places helping with people in recovery, and it felt like I should say something because I do have, many friends. I have some experience in that with a lot of friends who I know people have changed their lives. I know that the percentages might be tough over at day report, but I know people who have gone through there and changed their lives. And then as far as the recovery, I know that some of the places you were mentioning are the first places where people have to go like a 30-day recovery, or maybe some are 3 months. But then I know there are secondary facilities where people go to, once they've cleaned, they've gotten everything out of their system to clean, then they move on. I know 2 places, one for men that I really know has a high success rate. I know a lot of people who have completely changed their lives and are great citizens. The Canal Valley Fellowship Home, I know for the men, and then for women, it's Ray of Hope. Ray of Hope is a wonderful, it's just, I know a lot of people that have worked there and gone through there, and it's an important part of the community. So I just felt like I should say that. I think maybe I've talked long enough. There are so many wonderful things. I had so many questions. But just after saying that, I'd like to talk forever. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you all so much for being here. This has really been good. Thank you.
Well, I want to talk to Jedediah. Jedediah has had the experience of being a corrections officer in one of the actual jails. So can you share with us your perspective from actually inside the jail, dealing with those who are incarcerated and their freedom taken away?
I'll be back.
Someone who's inside of jail, their freedoms are taken away. Not all of their rights are taken away, and that's really important that they have certain rights. And that's an issue with, as a correction officer, that your job, you have 3 main functions: care, custody, and control. And it seems like that's not very much, but that is the basic thing that your goal of every day is to make sure everyone's cared for, make sure that there are control, as in they're not doing necessarily what they want to do, that they're where they're supposed to be, and they're doing things in the right order. And then the custody part is real more of the security for the public, so that they're just not out and they're in custody. We know where they're at all times. The rights right now in West Virginia we have a regional jail system, so there's policies set in place to protect those rights. You know, obviously you have constitutional rights, but right now in the West Virginia regional jail system, the jails are overcrowded, they're understaffed, and you know, the correctional officers honestly are underpaid. I think there was, this week it came out they were the lowest in the nation. We're one of the only states that have I think we might be the only one that has a state-ran regional jail system. Other states usually have a co-op between counties when they have regional jails. So we have the state control of a regional jail system, and it's across the board. So if there's a problem affecting one regional jail, it's probably affecting all of them. Because it should, all the jails, all 10 jails should be standard. You talk about, you know, people's rights and things like that. The one thing I noticed from being a correctional officer, you go to a correction academy about after 9 months to a year of being there. So you've been doing the job, working about 70 hours a week, and you haven't really had the training that you need to do the job. You know, and I think, you know, even police officers, if you look at what the training they go through, it's maybe not the standard that we would really want, because at the end of the day, you're going to have attorneys who are going to go back over and say, well, did they do this the right way? Were their rights violated? So you have a high standard that you're expected to, you know, be held to. As a correction officer, I would spend a lot of times where I would just go to work, come home on, you know, very little sleep. You know, it is definitely a dangerous job. You know, there's weapons inside, there's drugs, there's inmates who are trading sex for drugs, there's, you know, inmates who are bribing other officers to bring in drugs, and actually not just drugs, even tobacco is actually more sought out than actual drugs at sometimes. So all these things are going on at the regional jail, and part of the problem is, you know, the officer pay is not that high, so you have a high turnover of employment, and when you have a high turnover, you're going to constantly be working overtime to make up for the guy who just quit yesterday because he didn't want to work 16 hours, you know, on his day off, where he was planning on working 12 hours a day and he had to work 20 hours that day. So those are some of the issues that go on. You know, if you can imagine if you were understaffed and you have to go into a room about the size of this room, and it's your job to make sure everyone gets fed, and then you have 7 more rooms the same size, you have to make sure all those people get fed, and you got to do that before, at a certain time when you got a time crunch. So those are some of the things that the officers have to constantly be working. They're always, you know, on the clock looking for their next thing to do. So maybe one inmate could be asleep, or maybe not even be alive, might not even be breathing, and it's real easy to overlook and kind of neglect some of those, you know, the care aspect of that, because you're just trying to get your job done. You're having the pressure to just do your job, and you might say, I've got 30 people in this section, I've got 30 trays, and you hand out 30 trays. There might be a guy, I promise you, if there's a tray on the stack, there's going to be somebody who's going to try to come back in line and get a second tray because he knows so-and-so is up in their cell asleep. But we don't know if that person was just in a fight and maybe they're injured. And then maybe we do go by and check on them whenever it's time to count. So some of those things that some of these inmates, we don't really know what's going on because we don't have the time to get in there and actually interact with them and have that direct supervision and always know what's going on. And so it can definitely be a dangerous place for people who are incarcerated, and sometimes those rights are not intentionally violated, but just neglected because of the system of being overworked and understaffed.
So at the daycare, there's at daycare there's a required ratio of caregiver to children? Is there a requirement for officers per?
There is, and it's to give you an example, and this is from when I worked there. we had a central control unit. It's a 2-man post, and it's actually designed where once you're inside, you really can't get inside that. You have to let someone in to get there. There's the other keys to get there. That's where they keep all the keys. The only other keys would be like outside of the secured area into administrative office. And it's considered to be a 2-person post. There's a desk in the front, desk in the back. And if you've been to the jail before you know central control, well, at night, they would make that a 1-person post. And I always thought, what if someone would have a heart attack? An officer would have a heart attack in here. You'd have to get somebody who had access to the keys and who would happen to be on the outside of the gates, because they would be the only ones who could even get the keys to come back in. So literally, if as an officer you had a medical emergency and you're in that central control post, you were down. They cut corners, I guess, to say that, and you would actually could possibly die because the person who would be they'd call to come let you out or come let the ambulance in, might be 30 minutes away. So I mean that's the kind of things that the officers are putting their life on the line just by sitting at a desk in a room that's locked all by themselves. And I don't think people really understand that that's the kind of things that they go through. One of the statistics is, that they started studying is the PTSD rates among correctional officers is actually higher than what the military is, and their suicide rates among correctional officers is sort of a high rate. The life expectancy is, I think around 57 for correctional officers. So those are some issues that, aren't really addressed for corrections. And it's not just about pay, but when you do pay people more, you can get better qualified people in there, and you can have your full staff. And that's a big issue.
But in talking about overlooking individuals' rights, I'd like to speak to the judge. I heard a story where a young lady was in jail and she wasn't transported to a hearing that she had. So she was actually penalized and found guilty of other charges and other situations that were going on with her life that she had no control over because she was already incarcerated and they wouldn't transport her to her hearing. Do you have situations like that? How would that be addressed?
No, I've not had a situation like that, and I am constrained about what I can talk about by the judicial canons and how I would rule on certain things, because what you can't do and what you don't know is you don't know all the facts, and you have to hear and consider all the facts before you can make a determination as to what one would do or what wouldn't do. So it really wouldn't be appropriate to talk about that. But no, I've not had that situation presented to me.
What's been handed out, and I had copies of, and I have signed up and received my letter of acceptance to the Citizens Police Academy. Again, we are asking these officers, even when I heard of the training, the sensitivity training that they were going through, one of the very first things in my mind was, well, did we do any sensitivity training for what they do every day? And I don't, I'm with the group, I'm all for the sensitivity training, but how did you create a training before you examine what the persons do? And when I started going to the CARE Coalition meetings and spoke to some of those people, they were just signing up as well. They had just heard of it themselves. So for me, I'm an education major. They usually have you study something before you start making lesson plans. And if you haven't had the opportunity to actually study other than statistics on a paper and getting involved with the people, how do you create an effective training for those individuals? How are you able to understand the language that they're speaking back at you? For me, I have to say, I didn't go through the sensitivity training. I am going to ask them when they will be doing it again so that I can see their side of it. But at this point, for me, it's clear that they didn't follow through their footsteps on a daily basis to see what they see in order to make something that's effective. And for me, I don't know how you saw it or what have you. You've been great at all the meetings. But that's just my personal opinion and why I brought it back to our Black Lives Matter Solidarity Task Force. That's why I've emailed the applications out to our group. That's why they're up I really believe it's very important, especially if we're sitting in this room, that we take the time to see the other side. So, now with that said, are there any last statements? Because I've had you guys sequestered, that's my new word, legal.
We have a junior academy too, and it's July the 10th through the 14th, and we're taking applications now. And if you got a kid that wants to go, I got applications up here with me, just by chance.
What dates, when does this run?
March the 7th, but I will have to have that jewel back by next Friday, because there's no way I can get a letter out to you by the following Tuesday.
What's the next one after that?
It'll be in the fall.
In the fall?
We're running 2 a year now, we're on our 24th one.
Before we wrap up, can I just ask a question here?
Rusty, here you go. Come on up here, boy, come on.
I don't need the mic in here.
He's doing good.
I'm a stage 3 cancer survivor. I was given 4 months to live in 2012, and I made the decision, I know it's illegal, but I made the decision to use medical cannabis through chemotherapy, and it kept me alive. I basically thought it would be better to be illegally healed than legally dead, and I'm glad I made it.
Yeah, see? Come on, Rusty, come on.
Well, I've heard a couple of issues tonight that I think cannabis could address. You were talking about our overcrowding in the jails. The most recent numbers I have are from 2010, and they say 65% of our incarcerated people are for nonviolent cannabis offenses. Also, as far as racial disparities, you're 3 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis in Charleston, although whites and blacks use it about the same. I think it was 7 times more likely in Cabell County and 8 times more likely in Wood County. So, that being said, would you support cannabis decriminalization legislation?
Me?
Well, I'm just asking, prosecutors, law enforcement.
We've got the panel.
All right, here we go. So, does anybody have a guesstimate on what the THC level was of cannabis in the 70s?
It was about 7 to 8%.
It was a little less than that. About 5 was about the average, but I'll go up to 7 or 8. And then, what is the THC level now of the genetically engineered marijuana in Colorado?
From what I hear, 20 to 25%.
I got 30. And so here's what happens with people generally, and I'll just put this out here. People mess things up. And when they mess stuff up, what I mean by that, it's like not good enough. So now, like we used to have explosions here due to making chemicals that were engineered as drugs. But we haven't heard of those in 2 or 3 years because they fixed the Sudafed, and now we don't have meth explosions. But now in Colorado, do you know what kind of explosions they're having?
From the BHO, from making the waxes and the concentrates.
Which is butane hash oil.
Right.
Butane hash oil is also known as butter. And what it is they take it, they strain it with the butane, which is lighter fluid. Then they have to get the lighter fluid off of the THC. And the way they do that is to burn it off, which creates the explosion. Which leaves over a residue that looks a lot like peanut brittle. And the THC level in butane hash oil is about...
Usually around 90%. 90 to...
I'll go 80. I'll give you a little less on that.
Between 80 and 90.
I'll go 80 on that one. I'll give you a little less. So what we arrive at here, even if we go from the 7% standard, and even if we say 70% standard, it's 10 times what it was from then to here. So when I say it's never enough, that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's just hard when you legalize something like that, and to say it's not here in West Virginia, it is here. Now, to my perspective, not this. I'm taking this patch off, and it's the news on me. I'm kidding. You're not putting this on me. It's your news. So, my opinion, okay, I think medical marijuana has its purpose in a lot of different places, and one of which of those is cancer. In saying that, I have never smoked an aspirin. So why can't we make it in pill form? And I think life is good.
Well,
we're doing it for treatment, not to get high.
Right.
And that's my perspective, and I would support that.
Right. Well, as far as smokable flower goes, because I've heard this argument in the legislature, I've lobbied for the last 4 years on this subject. And when I would leave the hospital, people think that they've been dizzy and they know what vertigo is like. Until you've sat through aggressive chemotherapy, you have no idea. And
I've had
times that I couldn't. Well, there's times that like you can't open your eyes. I mean, literally, they're guiding me out of the hospital, and I was too proud to sit in the wheelchair and let them roll me out. I walked myself in. I wanted to walk myself out.
But the vertigo would be so intense that I couldn't focus, I couldn't open my eyes, and within 30 seconds of one hit, all of that would right itself. I mean, 30 seconds. So from an impairment point of view, had I had to drive myself home from the hospital directly out of chemo, I'd have been the most dangerous person on the road. But had I been allowed to use cannabis, I would have been much safer. And the Journal of the American Medical Association released a study in 2014 showing a 29% decrease in opiate-related deaths in states that have either decriminalized or medical cannabis. Over 5 years, that percentage increases to 50%, 47.8%. Right now, according to the CDC, we're losing 48 West Virginians every month to opiates. So if we have a tool in our arsenal that we can cut that down by 30% in 1 year, to me it makes no sense to not do that. And I'm not saying create a legal market and all that. If they want to do that, that's fine. I'm asking more of a decriminalization part. I don't think cancer patients should have to face incarceration for growing a plant that has never killed a single human in all of recorded human history, never taken a life. It doesn't affect the part of your brain that controls breathing and heartbeat and all that. So my question is, if you stop on your way home and you get 2 rolls of Tums, antacids, and you eat both of those rolls, you can die. You can die from Tylenol, you can die from aspirin, you can die from all these things. Even with the accelerated THC rates, it's still impossible for you to overdose and die. So I don't understand.
I might get with you on that one.
Oh, actually, you can talk to us. We've been working with Dr. Steve Corns from Harvard University, and there's mountains of research showing that no, you cannot overdose and die.
I cannot overdose and die, but there was a student of 16 years old in Washington State that walked up on a building and thought he could fly and jumped off the building and died.
Right, I'm sure that would happen, but how many people are going to crash and die?
Because he ate a candy bar that had marijuana in it that he bought that was, it was candy bar, marijuana candy bar, and you were supposed to eat 1/8 of the candy bar, and he ate the whole thing. So he ingested too much marijuana, which caused him to go to the building and jump. I am not, thank goodness I'm not a legislator, and I don't have to make these decisions.
Let's move on to
there we go.
You seem to be getting ready to jump out.
I mean, I'll be brief because I don't think it would surprise anyone in the room that the ACLU lawyer is for legalization of marijuana and decriminalization of all drugs. I think that more dangerous drugs should be treated as health problems and not criminally. So I will just briefly say that. And I just also, to speak to medical cannabis, I think one of the most beautiful moments of last year's legislative session was Delegate Flanagan, who is a cancer survivor, who stood up and gave his first floor speech to talk about how medical cannabis saved his life. And so I would highly encourage you to check that out if you haven't seen it.
And before the next thing, because I heard some rumbling, I spent like 12 years as a pharmacy technician, nationally certified, between states working. And one thing that I took an interest in is medicine, because I did that for a while. There is a documentary out there called Illegal Drugs and How They Became That Way. And for the most part, every drug, well actually not the most, every drug that's illegal now was legal. Yeah. And pretty much because of fear, mostly to persuade the public against African Americans or those who were others, they did this huge campaign against certain groups of people whenever they started to rise and used drugs or the drug of the day as the reason why it needed to become illegal.
It's still happening.
And it's still happening that sometimes small groups of people put out full campaigns because of a certain group. One cartoon said, you have to watch out for the cocaine-crazed Negro. The cocaine-crazed Negro received cocaine so they could work longer hours on the docks. And as they became more independent, there was a need to put them down. There wasn't anything like a lazy nigga until that nigga was free. You always had to get little good niggas on the plantation. So it's all about spin and perspective. I have no problem with using the words of making it all legal. Everything needs to be moderated.
This past summer, I went out to Los Angeles to visit family, and And I was amazed that on virtually every street corner, in virtually every mini mall, there was a medical marijuana shop signified by a green cross. And what they were selling that was being taxed, my clients get sent to prison for an indeterminate term of not less than 1 or more than 5 years. I think legalizing medical marijuana is a no-brainer, and I think it is ridiculous that we have it classified as a drug for which there is no legitimate medicinal value when we all know that it has legitimate medicinal value. I would go further and say marijuana should be legal if for no other reason, aside from the fact that it's never killed anybody, if for no other reason than the fact that West Virginia is in a major budget crisis. We have been in a major budget crisis for years. They are talking about doing away with public broadcasting. They're talking about doing away with services that we all value. And if marijuana were licensed and taxed, we would solve the budget crisis, not only through the money that we raise, but also we wouldn't need as many beds in jails and prisons, because we put people in prison and in jail for selling or even just using marijuana. It's ridiculous. We can fix our problems very easily with the stroke of a pen.
I second all of that.
I hate to cop out here, but judicial canons prohibit me from discussing these types of very interesting and thought-provoking issues. So I can't publicly voice my opinions with respect to those issues because some of this stuff may come in front of me. But I certainly have appreciated the dialogue.
Microphone.
Well, let's let Joe go ahead and have the
I'm sorry.
You don't care what I have.
I do. I just really wanted to hear law enforcement's perspective on it, because as a patient, when I would leave to procure my medicine, you have no idea how humiliating it is to know that there's a substance that is responsible for you still being on this earth, but yet you have to duck every policeman you see when you go to get it because you're a criminal for using medicine. I made the choice to use that because I've seen what happens with pharmaceuticals. I've seen so many people I went to school with that are either strung out or dead because of pharmaceuticals. And the way I looked at it, although they basically gave me a death sentence with cancer, I didn't want to fight through that and come out addicted to some pharmaceutical. I didn't want to be another one of those people. But, I still had to deal with that paranoia. If I had been pulled over, I'm an honest person. I wouldn't tell the police, oh, no, I don't have anything. If they asked me, yes, sir, I do, and here's what I have. But just knowing that if that situation would have presented itself, I could have lost my freedom for getting myself through the worst situation you could possibly imagine, to me is just, it's not right. It shouldn't be that way, especially in a state that touts the motto, Mountaineers are always free. If we're always free, I shouldn't lose my freedom for using medicine. And,
I want to hear what you have to say there.
I think it should be used for medicine only. I don't think it should be used recreationally. It should not be legalized for recreational use. And I have just my own personal bias because there's people I know who were pretty intelligent with it people and started smoking weed and became apathetic and are now pretty much, that's what they do. They play Madden, they get high, they play Madden, they get high. They play Madden and they get high. And I realize there are other drugs that they could be using, but in my personal experience, marijuana has been the one that caused, I guess, people who I thought had more potential not to live up to their potential.
And my response to that is, without marijuana, we might not have jazz.
we would be fine.
Jazz makes you nervous. You're absolutely right. No, that's about
All right, we've been here for a really long time. I really hate for for you guys not to tell someone to come back that I'll have you here forever.
Hours and hours and hours.
So I do want to just, if you guys want to mingle and stay, if you have a second, if not, I do want to go ahead and officially just tell everyone thank you. I do want to let Paul from the church itself maybe address and say something to the group in regards to the UUs.
Before he does, may I say one last thing? Most of the people I represent who end up convicted because they confessed. You have the right to remain silent. Use it.
If you're stopped by the police, you don't even have to give your name unless they're asking for it for the purposes of a criminal investigation. You never have to answer any questions, and if you're arrested, all you have to say is, I'm not answering any questions and I want to speak to my lawyer. That's actually not why I grabbed the mic, though. I just wanted to say, I like to do this activity, close your eyes and picture a drug user. You should be picturing a white man over the age of 26 who likely has at least a high school diploma.
I just picture him
Just wanted to thank everyone for coming. I'm so glad that we could help host this. The panel, you were marvelous. Appreciate your kind words the last time you were in the building. And as you see the 7 principles that we try to follow here, and I think most anyone can live with those. So welcome. Anytime you feel like coming back, we do have a discussion group at 9:30 and a worship service at 11 o'clock on every Sunday. And you're more than welcome. All kinds are welcome here.
Thank you.